area contains a deadly map boss. Ah, well, that was anticlimactic. Hello then, my fellow Stormweavers. I am very excited to bring you this build. I am finally at Endgame, progressing through it, level 70, working my way through the maps. Still on the tier 2 step, but I've been completing tier 4s and tier 5s instantly as soon as I got to Endgame without any trouble, because it's quite easy to do things when you one-shot every enemy. And that's what this is really about, using Arc to do colossal amounts of burst damage with every cast, with every bounce. You will one-shot random rares that you don't even know are on your screen yet as they charge at you, take a bounce of Arc, and then get disintegrated. It's incredibly satisfying. It's also incredibly satisfying not to use Spark. But what are we using? Archmage, of course, with some massive mana stacking going on. I am up to 3,000 while still retaining a nearly 2,000 shield. My gear is coming along nicely, but it's nothing like ridiculous yet. And as you can see, just sat here, my Arc has nearly 13k DPS. And just to get a feel for really how high this pushes it, we turn it off, we go down to 6k. Back on, up to 13. This 5% extra damage for every 100 mana is obviously ludicrously scalable, and that's not news to you. It's what pretty much all the Stormweavers are doing. But we are working in some lovely extras. The usual ones, like putting down your Mana Tempest, spiking up even more, switching to a staff for Rune of Power, and then that's going to take you even higher. We're going to touch like 25,000 DPS on your Arc, which at the stage of the game I'm at is silly. It's why it's just one-shotting everyone, but it goes even further. We are playing not with full arcane tempo, but with strike twice, so we can have 2 shocks at the same time on our enemies. This isn't really needed on your normal kind of trash, even your rares and such, but on bosses it makes your burst damage obscene. Because we're playing into increasing the magnitude of shock and really ramping up that debuff, we start to see silly numbers. I'm sure most of you know, but if you don't, when you attack something with your lightning, you will apply shock, and the chance is based on the damage that you deal. And then this by default is they now take 20% more damage. Well, magnitude raises that 20%. So I currently, as it stands, inflict a 41% shock, and I can inflict that twice thanks to the Ascendancy. So I apply plus 82% damage to every enemy, which on top of all the other scaling we're doing is absolutely magnificent. Said other scaling being like applying lightning exposure and your curse of conductivity. You can see the extra kind of damage dealt / damage taken that you stack up on every enemy. So we end up doing silly damage with a colossal infinite mana pool while still retaining a ridiculous amount of tankiness from a massive barrier, and eventually we can take this into a little bit of CI. Eventually mind over matter will come into play, and I will talk about all of that. But more than anything, you're kind of seeing the results, right? This is how this build was towards the end of the campaign, towards the end of Act 3 Cruel, just chewing through these chunky boss health bars, and it has only come along in leaps and bounds since then, starting to do endgame, starting to work my way through maps. You see it as I go through said maps, everything the Arc touches just drops dead, and it's immensely fun. It's still fairly damn speedy too, as you only need to cast 1 spell per pack of enemy, as you know they're all going to die. And because the incredible burst with the double shock, the Archmage, everything stacking together, you 1-tap or at most 2-3 every rare, and that is lovely too. This is a lot of fun, and the best thing about it is if you do prefer Spark, you can do this exact same build and just swap it to Spark, which is really flexible. So without further ado then, if you are indeed sold, if you like the look of being a lightning zapping, chaining god amongst exiles, especially after the unfortunate nerfs to the cast on stuff, even shock is just kind of really lame now, so this is kind of the way to go, then let's get into it, and I will show you that way to go. We'll start then with your skills, what's supporting them, and how everything shapes up at the foundation level. So Arc then is our main spammer. It's a very quick casting, especially with all the cast speed we will be picking up from the skill tree that we will get to, and I've just found it's really reliable, strong damage that delivers in a way I prefer over something like Spark. Now I will say you can do this exact build, as I said earlier, by just using Spark instead, and that's completely fine. But I have just personally found I've had much better, stronger results, especially against bosses with Arc, as it really bursts them down. In any case then, what you want supporting it is as follows. Unleash, so we just do more of them and do more damage. It's very, very solid. You want considered casting. This is worth it. The attack speed down is very negligible, and 25% more damage is very not negligible. Then we want arcane tempo for just 25% more cast speed, so immediately overwriting this downside here and then some, and we really start to feel that speed up. And then finally we are just giving it an extra level because that is a huge deal. We're on 13k DPS without it in, and we lose 1.5k without it, so I find this is very nice. And if you want to know how to get 4 support slots via corrupting, we do have a video on that that went up literally earlier today, like the one before this, so that's there for you. Then you want Orb of Storms. This exists to just be our put on enemy, and now enemy takes a lot more damage, because this is going to really reliably apply shock. Obviously everything does, but this does it really, really well because we support it with conduction, 100% more chance to shock. We also then give it a larger area of effect, so it's just easier to actually make it do what it needs to. And then finally we give it lightning exposure. So this will make enemies take loads more damage from shock, and then it will also lower their lightning resistance, which is really, really nice. This coupled with conductivity also lowering lightning resistance, you start to see why we get some ridiculous moments of, oh, and they're just deleted and they're dead now. So yes, then conductivity. This, the sigil you place on the ground, it pops, and then everyone that got hit by it is feeling the pain. It's a lightning resist debuff, and we want it to, well, last 40% longer, so we don't have to recast it. Persistence is nice here. We have heightened curse, so it's a little bit, well, heightened, stronger, 25%, more potent, and therefore more damage. And then finally focused, so it comes out faster. It needs to pop when it actually applies, so it makes that pop happen quicker, which just makes it more comfortable to put on. Then the big boy in Mana Tempest. This is just everything. You will put it down, get a huge increase in damage, and then the more mana you spend, the more mana you drain, until eventually you run out and it goes down. But by that point, everything will be dead, so we don't really mind. We support it then with Inspiration, so it has 40% less cost, which is massive for something that drains your mana that fast. Like, that is a huge gain in time, about 4 or 5 seconds longer in the Tempest when I first tested it. We then also have Premeditation, so everything that's cast while in it is an extra 15% more powerful. Why not? Let's really push it. And then I found this to be quite nice, Murderous Intent. So this means while we're casting with our Mana Tempest, anything that reaches 30% just kind of dies. It's a lower threshold for magic and rare enemies, but still, that's really, really good. It just gets everything dead dead and out the way quicker so your arcs can be hitting other healthier things, though this slot really is flexible and you can put in what you like. Then we have Archmage itself, which we just want on, toggled on, using the 100 spirit you get from the campaign and doing its thing. It really cannot be overstated how much damage this adds to just switch on and then build the mana to both support it and scale it as hard as possible. 3000 mana is a 90% damage increase, and it's just going to keep going and going and going from there. And for those that were wondering, where is this all from? Well, your spirit gems are these ones, right? Your passives, where you got cast on shock from. Archmage is the final tier that needs a level 14 one, so grab it here and then toggle it on. And if you have a little bit of extra spirit, if you've got some armor that gives you it, you can support it with clarity, so you get 30% more mana regen while you're actually in the Archmage, which is quite nice, which is, you know, all the time. And then finally, lightning penetration is decent on your arc too, if you instead prefer to give the +1 skill to the Archmage and then replace it with lightning penetration into the arc. So that covers your skill gem setup. So the actual way to play this then is very, very simple. If the enemy is big, threatening, tanky, a boss, you will simply put down your Rune of Power, which we'll talk about in a moment. You put Ball of Storms on their face, you put the Curse of Conductivity on them, you put your Mana Tempest down, and then you just start blasting. Then to do it at more full speed, you've walked into the boss arena and then quickly Rune of Power, Orb of Storms, Conductivity, Mana, and we are off. And they will already be dead at this point, and we're very happy collecting our lovely loot. So, Sigil of Power then. Let's actually go over it because it is the extra little cherry on top secret sauce here of this build. You get it from an inherent ability on a staff. So this one here gives me level 13 Sigil of Power. Honestly, I could do with a little bit of a better one, but it is what it is. So what this will do is put the sigil on the ground, and that will make you do more damage. Then as you spend mana, you will power up the sigil and unlock extra layers to it, and every extra layer makes you do more damage. Now, there is 4 stages to it, and every stage is 13% more spell damage, which is obviously a lot once we get up to it, 52%. And we can reach stage 4 really quickly because Mana Tempest is making it so that we are spending mana really quickly. And we're already at stage 4, and you can tell it's there when the eye is glowing underneath you. So this is obviously lovely to have, but it means that we need to swap to a staff to cast it, but we don't want to be casting everything else with the staff because the staff is the weaker weapon. If that is the case for you, if your staff with it on is your strongest weapon, then you're all good. But for everyone else like me, who has a wand and focus, which I would recommend, you can get a lot out of this. I've got an extra 5 skill ranks between them. Yes, the staff can match it, but this ends up with more energy seal too, which is really good for us, that we'll get into. But either way, what you want to do is put the staff in the second weapon slot. You can toggle this up top here, so switch to slot 2, put your staff in, and then you want to come to your skill panel here, and then these little arrows next to where the DPS box would be, you click them, and then use with weapon set. So what this means is it will dictate what weapon you cast this skill with. So if I've got both 1 and 2 ticked here, it will cast it with whatever I've got out. But if I untick 2 and then close it, even if I swap to weapon set 2, because 2 is unticked and I now cast Arc, it'll auto swap me back to the other set so I can do it with that. And you just make that happen across the entire way. You set every single skill that isn't Sigil of Power to only cast with your main strongest weapon set. So I do Sigil of Power, switch to the staff, and then immediately switch back to Wand and Focus for the rest of the combo, and it's a lovely little extra bit of tech that gets you a lot of extra damage. So that is essentially that when it comes to your main combo and the skill gems. For just generally playing it, obviously, as I said, for bosses, you've got the big everything down and you're away, but for just generally mobbing, you don't really need to do much more than just kind of walk forward and zap with your arc. Now, obviously, Mana Tempest is very easy to toggle on and off, so it's completely fine to just flick it on, do a couple of arcs, and then walk away. The juice that it will give you will mean that you just one-shot the entire group of enemies that you've just chained on, and you can comfortably leave. And that's how I would do it. As soon as you see an enemy on your screen, whack down a Mana Tempest, fire a couple of arcs, and then walk away, let it drop, and just continue like that. So you'll be walking along, boom, couple shocks, and then we carry on walking along. Oh, enemies, okay, boom, couple shocks, okay, and we're all good. Oh, enemies again, alright, one more. Boom, like that, and then we are all good, and so on and so forth. I realize it's very simple, but, you know, I want to make this as thorough and as detailed as possible for you, and then you can press all of your other skills if you're feeling extra spicy, or a particularly chunky-looking special enemy is ahead of you. Next then, let's look at our passive skill tree, as a few of the nodes will make the gear we then go on to talk about a lot easier to understand. So, for your ascendancy points, you want to put your first two into Constant Gale, so we have Permanent Arcane Surge. You want your second pair of points to go into Shock Chance, and then mainly Strike twice, so we can double up on our shocks. For the last 4 points, I would go into Mana, and then Force of Will, and then lastly, I would either go into Elemental Damage, and Scouring Winds for more exposure, or if I want to have fun, which I probably kinda do, I would go to Tempest Scholar so we can actually put down your Elemental Storms, which are a nice little DPS increase. Nothing else is really too worth it. So, the main tree then. We want to be starting on the right now, as we want to be pumping our energy shield as much as possible, because we will be setting up that the more shield we have, the more mana we have, as we ultimately are using Eldritch Battery over here, converting all our shield to mana, which is why it's cool that we still actually somehow have a massive shield, and we will get to that, though you might well know. In any case, I will go through this in the order I got them, so that's the order you should get them into, point for point chronologically. Energy shield into more energy shield, and then pure energy here. Then we are going to go up to recharge, dampening shield, energy shield recharge, and then get mana blessing for a nice little juice to our mana. And I would recommend at this point you don't swap to this build too early, probably Act 2 onwards cruel, or you might find you've not got enough points to properly set things in motion. Then we are up to here, where I have a strength and a dexterity. The reason I have that is simply so I have enough dex and strength to be allowed to use the support gems that are tied to them. So conduction, lightning, exposure, and murderous intent needs me to have this dex, and then persistence, inspiration, and premeditation needs me to have this strength. So if you're trying to put these in from the skill gem section and it won't let you, that's why you probably don't have enough strength or dex. I would like these to be int, but it is what it is. So once we get here, we want to go down, get even more energy shield and mana regen, and then finally insightfulness, which is just a beautiful bundle of good stats for this setup. Then we want to keep heading right to this fork, and then down to this intelligence, follow along for more mana regen and magnitude of your shock, and then lastly mana regen if we get a shock recently. All of this is just beautiful. Plays into the shock, plays into the mana regen we need, and really ups our damage. Now, ignore this section down here. You'll be doing this later on when you get a little bit deeper. We need other stuff as a priority first. Then we continue all the way to this node here, drop down to elemental damage, so we can then get Echoing Thunder, and this basically is just 30% more damage because we are always shocking an enemy recently. Then we continue along this highway to here, taking a hard left turn to this, and then finally going to this intelligence to go up into lightning skill speed. Follow all the lightning skill speeds until you get lightning quick. This is just great. It's a load of attack speed, which which we want, well, cast speed specifically, and then some more lightning damage, which is no bad thing. We then also want to take the left route to give the increased chance to shock. We always want the double shocks on as easily and quickly and permanently as possible, and then drenched. The huge increased chance to shock is lovely, but also gaining an extra 5% of your lightning damage as cold damage really isn't too bad either. Then we want to go up from here, and then we get to Eldritch Battery. Now then, this is where I need to make a big disclaimer. You need a specific unique item before I recommend you take Eldritch Battery. And that will make more sense when we get to the gear, but as a quick TLDR, if you do not have the Everlasting Gaze Azure Amulet, I would recommend not taking Eldritch Battery because you'll find that you are quite squishy. As without this amulet on, it really does take all of your energy shield, and then that's going to mean you're very much made out of paper. So that as a heads up, and I'll explain what's going on with this in the gear section, but skill tree wise, yeah, wait till you get that unique before you take Eldritch Battery, but then indeed take Eldritch Battery, as it will give you a colossal amounts of mana. And I must say, this is a endgame build, right? It's a build to swap to once you start mapping. Ideally, you've got access to gear, so I can see in the future comments of I changed to this, but I don't have this unique, and it just feels really weak, and that's why, right? You do need the components that actually make this. That's, you know, how that works. In any case, then we go over to mana regen, up to more, and to arcane intensity, 3% more spell damage per 100 mana. I mean, sit at 3k, yep, that's a huge increase. Then we want to go up this left side here, raw mana, and then to this intelligence. We want to then dip right in order to grab this big 25 int node, lots of mana, and then up here for more increase to energy shield. Now, you don't need to take the huge increase to energy shield nodes until you can also take Eldritch Battery, so something like Patient Barrier can also wait until Eldritch Battery is in play. Then we want to continue left now and branching up into here to follow through and get both pure power for another 2% lightning damage per 10 intelligence. We are rocking a lot of intelligence here, so that's a nice gain. And then down for some lovely shock magnitude to really ramp up that double shock damage increase. Then we continue on left to get to a dual shot, and in here you just want to put in the best that you have that helps. 10% damage and crit chance is what I got, but you can choose from your jewel supplies. Ideally, anything mana or barrier related is nice, but just general increases will do you fine. Same with all the jewel slots that. Then we continue on down the highway and eventually end up at this next jewel shot where, yes, again, just do your best. 9% lightning damage again is the best I've got. And then we want to head down and finally get yourself Touch the Arcane. This is how far I would recommend you're able to get with your current points before swapping to this build, by the way. Then we want to go instead down here to Elemental Penetration and get Breaking Point for even more magnitude. Then we want Storm Charged for a load more damage, as we are casting enough that will always have a recent crit. And then finally down here for some free Elemental Resistance to help us cap and just more damage in general. Then at this point, you want to go all the way back to here, where we didn't follow through, and now we do. Continue on down to this, get more intelligence, and then we want to get the triple-double here. Initially, more chance to shock, and then 5% of damage is extra lightning damage, which is lovely. Then we want the critical hit chance, and 36% more damage if you've done a crit recently, which we will have done, so this is just a free big bump. And then finally, skill speed and mana regen, so that we're actually pumping out these arcs in a swifter fashion. Then, if you have more points than me, I will be continuing down here to eventually get energy shield even more and more mana regen, and then finally calibration for another big bump in my mana, which is really, really nice to have. For after that, there is various places you can go. More increase to your maximum energy shield is always going to be good. Getting more lightning penetration here and increase exposure effect is also going to be really, really nice for you. You can get stuff like just raw mana recovery here as well, and you can also go into things like heavy buffer for even more energy shield if you come over and down here. Basically, you're just looking for things that make your energy shield go higher after you've got what I have already got. Then the two things to talk about is this, mind over matter. This makes all your damage come out your mana before your health, but it halves your mana recovery. It's a fantastic node, but it needs very, very good gear. If you reach the point where you have, I would say, 4,000 mana, and you also manage to get at least, I would say, 600 mana recovery per second, and remember it's going to get halved, so probably even more than that, ideally, then you can go mind over matter. So I am almost there. And then at that point, you can also come all the way over here. You want to follow this highway down and end up here and get chaos inoculation. It'll make your max life 1, but full immunity to chaos is more than worth it, because all of the damage will be coming out your mana, and you still have an energy shield as backup if you somehow run out, and then it means that we just don't need to care about capping our chaos resistance, which is a huge relief on our gear. So do what I have done with my skill tree. When you get to 4k mana and as much regen as you can, grab chaos inoculation and mind over matter and enjoy being ridiculously tanky. So that is your passive tree. Now that we've done that, let's actually talk gear. Initially, just that staff with Sigil of Power, the stats on it don't matter. For the rest of everything, one thing you always have to keep in mind then, and this will keep coming up, so I'll just say it now generally, is you want to be resistance capped. That is 75%, so I'm still a little bit short. 25 on lightning, 15 on cold, and 5 on fire. It's a balancing act, and I am trying my best. I still don't have a slot in my gloves and my boots, so these runes here that give your cold resist, your lightning resist, and fire resist will indeed be the way that I can patch those holes. But remember that the best rune for us is the iron rune for 20% increase to your energy shield, as that means 20% more energy shield to be turned into mana with Eldritch Battery. So we ideally want to not be forced to use these elemental resist runes, but it is more important to cap your elemental resist than it is to get a little bit more energy shield. So that's kind of your rune plan and your elemental resist plan. So when choosing gear, for example, I am essentially just wearing this ring because of the 38% fire resist it gives me, as that's the most fire resist I can get in the slot, and I need it, and without it I have way too low. So always be thinking about that. Cap your elemental resists as soon as you can. After that, then, we are looking for essentially two main things on all of our gear, and I will use my helmet as an example. That is energy shield, i.e. the raw energy shield on the item, this 102 here, and then the plus maximum energy shield and percent increased energy shield. The reason being is that, of course, Eldritch Battery converts our energy shield to mana. So I have 3,087 mana right now. If I take off this helmet, I drop to 2,800, because that's a lot less barrier being converted. So pumping our energy shield is how we pump our mana. So when I find better energy shield gear, that's how I'll slowly climb to 4,000 plus mana and swap to mind over matter. So with that in mind then, yes, energy shield maximum on all your gear, get as much of it as you can. After that, just simple raw maximum mana is really good. So this 100 mana here is another stack of Archmage, and all of my other lovely, the more mana I have, the more damage I do from your skill tree, and so on and so forth. past that, then what you care about most is your plus levels to skills. This +3 to lightning skills, and this +2 to all spell skills. That's going to give you the biggest damage increase. And that's essentially the main 4 things that I can give you. Cap your elemental resist, get as much energy shield as you can, get as much raw increase to mana as you can, and then get as many ranks to skills and lightning skills as you can. Everything past that is secondary, helpful sure, but secondary. Like your stun threshold, which can come in very handy. Like the movement speed on your boots, which I heartily recommend. It makes a massive difference. Just walking around in a circle like this, you can kind of see I've got a bit of a pep in my step. If I take these off, we're back to slowly trudging around, and to say it's only 20%, you really feel it. This can go up to 30. Get movement speed on your boots, and you will be very, very happy. Other than that, offensively, cast speed is phenomenal, and then just spell damage and extra elemental or lightning damage will do you well too, and then generally anywhere, mana regen is fine. So that's the rules for your gear and what you're looking out for. So something like this chest that gives me 602 energy shield, I mean 3k mana now, take it off, down to 2.3. That's how big of a difference it makes, and if you do find a good energy shield chest like this, ramp up the quality to 20% to increase it, and enjoy the results. So uniques then, there are 2 that I am using, the Midnight Braid and the Everlasting Gaze. The Everlasting Gaze is essentially required for the build, as it lets you use Eldritch Battery, and then Midnight Braid is just nice. It's comfortable, but it's not super needed. So let's talk about Everlasting Gaze. So you gain 24% of your maximum mana as extra maximum energy shield. For whatever reason, this applies after Eldritch Battery. So Eldritch Battery's eating your shield, giving you mana, and then this is still letting you have extra energy shield because it's equipped. Whether this isn't supposed to happen or not is a question mark, but if I take it off, 0 barrier, 3000 mana. If I put it back on, 3000 mana, 2000 barrier. So yeah, this thing is absolutely cracked for our purposes. It lets us have our cake and eat it too. Use Eldritch Battery for huge mana without actually giving up a huge energy shield, so we're not squishy. So yeah, I cannot recommend enough getting as your amulet and then putting on your Eldritch Barrier. Also, you know, the max mana, the mana regen, it's really nothing to shake a stick at either. So then when we come to Midnight Braid, this is just really nice. 50% of the damage you will take will be given back to you as mana regen over 8 seconds. So if you take a big, 1000 damage hit, which happens a lot of the time, that's 500 more mana that's going to be trickling back to you over 8 seconds, which is really, really helpful. The all res is nice too, the max mana is nice too, it's a solid option. You can get away with a really good rare belt, in fact that might be a little bit better, but it's very comfortable and I like having it. For the rest of it, just get the best flasks that you can. They're not really a huge deal. Mana can help you sustain for a little bit longer, and then I would definitely recommend a golden charm so you can find better gear quicker, as we can't really afford any gold rolls on the rest of our gear, but it's a good use for your actual charm. That then is that. I realized that was a lot, but I really wanted to go in depth and properly explain anything, try and make all the connections happen to you, and I will answer any questions that need answering in the comments. But more than anything, I just hope you, like this, enjoy it. I am still learning, still build crafting, still theory crafting, and doing my best to produce some awesome Stormweaver stuff, and it is really fun just doing some big zappy chain lightnings with lots of mana, and just watching everything get decimated. Let me know what you thought, of course, and if you did like it, subscribe for more. Consider supporting the future of the channel on Patreon down below, and until we meet again, a good bye.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.